Welcome, esteemed viewers, to a captivating journey through the darkened shadows of our human history. Imagine a simple barber drilling through your skull with absolutely no pain relief, just to cure a headache. This was not merely a nightmare, but the truly terrifying reality of medicine during the Middle Ages. To survive a heavy sickness meant surviving the brutal, devastating treatments of those who promised to help. How did our entire humanity finally escape this era of tragic ignorance to discover true, lasting healing? In the 13th century, immense disease and dark despair covered the entire European continent without mercy. People lived in constant fear of heavy plagues, entirely unaware of the unseen microscopic threats surrounding them. Historical records clearly show that basic hygiene was completely ignored in these damp, overcrowded ancient cities. The Church held absolute power, constantly declaring that all physical suffering was a direct divine punishment. If you fell terribly ill, society widely believed you were suffering for your hidden, unforgivable, dark sins. Monasteries served as the only hospitals, but they offered nothing more than desperate, quiet, endless prayers. Monks would stand by your decaying straw bed, chanting their sacred hymns, while your physical body slowly withered away. The strict religious laws strictly forbade any early scientific exploration or study of the human physical form. To look inside the departed was considered a mortal sin, keeping humanity locked in total medical darkness. Without a true understanding of human anatomy, medieval healers were walking completely blind in the endless dark. Patients lay trembling in the freezing stone crypts, waiting for a grand miracle that would almost never arrive. A simple toothache or a minor infected wound could very easily become a slow and agonizing final sentence. There were absolutely no trained doctors to call upon, only desperate people seeking possible relief from the pain. The air inside these religious wards was incredibly thick with the tragic stench of physical decay and endless sorrow. You would nervously clutch your wooden cross tightly, hoping that the divine heavens would finally hear your desperate cries. But powerful faith alone could not stop the spreading infections or heal the broken bones of the medieval peasants. According to ancient texts, human life expectancy was brutally short, and infant mortality was tragically high. As the blazing fever burned through your veins, you would beg for anyone to end the excruciating physical suffering. This completely desperate need for immediate relief gave rise to the most terrifying profession of the Middle Ages. When prayers failed to cure the fading souls, the terrified masses turned to the brutal hands of the barber surgeons. These men were not educated scholars, but simple tradesmen who cut hair, pulled teeth, and recklessly spilled human essence. They continuously operated in dark, dirty alleys, wielding rusted iron tools that were never properly washed or cleaned. Their heavy leather aprons were completely stained with the dried crimson essence of countless previous unfortunate victims. You would be dragged onto a rough wooden table, fully awake and completely aware of the terrifying incoming nightmare. There was absolutely no anesthesia, no numbing potions, only the cold, hard grip of the surgeon holding you down. The truly terrifying sound of rusted metal scraping against bone would be the very last thing many patients ever heard. You were about to endure a medical procedure that closely resembled a horrific medieval session of tragic suffering. This was the absolute peak of medical ignorance, where the proposed cure was often far more devastating than the disease. If you suffered from severe recurring migraines or mental illness, the barber surgeon had a very gruesome solution. He would quickly take a sharp, rusted hand drill and physically bore a deep hole directly into your fragile living skull. This brutal ancient practice, known as trepanation, was believed to release the evil demons trapped inside your head. You would scream out in absolute agony as the metal pierced your bone, while the focused surgeon showed no emotion. For dangerous fevers and infections, They relied on the ancient and deeply flawed theory of the four bodily humors. They deeply believed your body was filled with essence, phlegm, and bile, which constantly needed to be balanced out. To fully restore this balance, the surgeon would boldly use a sharp blade to slice open your fragile veins without hesitation. They would brutally drain massive amounts of your essence into a brass bowl until you simply passed out from the heavy shock. Many incredibly weak and fading patients were entirely drained of their remaining life force by this barbaric practice. Even if you miraculously survived the heavy surgery, the filthy, unwashed instruments would quickly seal your tragic fate. Devastating infections spread rapidly through the open wounds, turning the operation into an absolute, tragic final trap. Ancient medical texts from the era reveal that countless precious souls perished from the gruesome aftermath of these treatments. Imagine lying in a pool of your own vital essence, realizing that the healer has just condemned you to the grave. The barber poles we see today originally symbolized the crimson rags hanging outside these very dangerous, brutal shops. It was a dark era, defined by extreme physical suffering, where medical logic was completely replaced by ancient, blind myth. How could frail humanity survive when the designated healers were actively accelerating the tragic end of the innocent? If you were trapped in that exceptionally dark time, would you risk the barber's blade, or choose to fade entirely, naturally? This horrifying reality pushed humanity to the brink of despair and immense biological devastation. But while Europe was deeply drowning in this darkened ignorance, a brilliant, hopeful light was shining across the ocean. Far away from the incredibly dirty alleys of the West, a completely different approach to medicine was quietly blooming. In the very vibrant heart of the Islamic world, the pursuit of scientific knowledge was considered a highly sacred duty. The incredibly vast deserts and bustling cities of the East became the ultimate sanctuary for true intellectual growth. Brilliant Arab scholars did not burn the ancient texts of the Greeks. Instead, they very carefully preserved and studied them. They translated the works of Hippocrates and Galen, building entirely upon their foundational wisdom. While European monks prayed in dark crypts, Eastern physicians were building vast, magnificent, sunlit hospitals of care. They deeply understood the basic principles of strict quarantine, hygiene, and the vital importance of clean environments. These brilliant, enlightened minds treated patients with deep compassion, relying on observation rather than superstition. Among these brilliant scholars emerged a towering figure who would eventually change the entire course of human history. His name was Ibn Sina, known widely as Avicenna, a true master of early medical science. Sitting in a grand library filled with glowing sunlight, he meticulously documented every human illness. He compiled the Canon of Medicine, a massive encyclopedia that organized diseases with pure logical system. Avicenna rejected demonic possession entirely, arguing diseases had natural, observable physical causes. He explored the contagious nature of tuberculosis, fully detailing the functions of the human nervous system. His incredibly elegant leather-bound books contained detailed instructions on proper surgical methods and pain management. He strongly emphasized the absolute necessity of keeping wounds clean, a concept completely foreign to the barber surgeons. According to historical accounts, his monumental medical textbook remained the global standard for over 6 long centuries. This wealth of knowledge could not be contained in the East forever. It was destined to cross the Mediterranean. As trade routes slowly reopened, Latin translations of Avicenna's work began to quietly enter into southern Europe. These incredibly precious ancient manuscripts were carried by brave merchants and scholars seeking the hidden truth of life. When these texts finally reached the shores of Italy, they quickly sparked an incredible revolution in medicine. The deeply dark walls of European ignorance began to crack under the overwhelming weight of logical, scientific fact. For the very first time in centuries, the focus shifted from blind religious faith to the actual study of the human body. The first medical universities began to slowly emerge in Italy, attracting curious minds from across the continent. Young, eager students gathered in brightly lit lecture halls to intensely study the translated wisdom of the Arab masters. They sat on rough wooden benches, carefully copying anatomical diagrams onto their parchment scrolls with intense, deep focus. The strict religious ban on human dissection was finally, slowly challenged, allowing a deeper look inside the human form. These brilliant early academics began to directly observe their patients, taking detailed notes on their actual symptoms. They fully realized that the brutal practices of the Barber surgeons were completely wrong and dangerously destructive. The rusted iron drill and the stained draining basin were gradually replaced by entirely clean tools and very careful study. This crucial transition marked the dawn of the Proto-Renaissance, a profound rebirth of all human understanding. The terrifying era of the brutal Barber surgeons was finally beginning to fade into the dark pages of history. But the truly horrifying lessons learned from those brutal centuries would forever remain etched in our collective memory. The early doctors standing in their clean robes looked back deeply at the horrific mistakes of their predecessors with pure shock. They knew modern medicine was built entirely upon the agonizing sacrifices of countless medieval victims. The heavily stained leather aprons and rusted tools became powerful symbols of the immense danger of unverified beliefs. It was a deeply painful journey, from the darkness of superstition to the bright light of medical evidence. Every single drop of life essence lost on those rough wooden tables served as a tragic warning for future generations. Does frail humanity always have to suffer through extreme, tragic ignorance before we can finally accept the logical truth? The highly precious ancient parchment books, heavily stained with time, hold the incredible story of our triumph over disease. Today, when we walk confidently into a sterile modern hospital, we owe our lives to this incredibly brutal struggle. We must absolutely never forget the terrified patients who suffered in the dark, paving the way for our current survival. Their completely silent screams from the 13th century echo as a constant reminder of the profound value of true science. The brilliant Canon of medicine remained a guiding light, clearly proving that knowledge knows no borders or cultural divisions. From the incredibly dark crypts of Europe to the bright libraries of the East, the quest for healing unites humanity. The history of medicine is a grand testament to our remarkable ability to overcome our terrifying mistakes. As the heavy dark shadow of the Middle Ages finally lifted, the glorious era of the Renaissance was fully ready to bloom. The crimson-stained hands of the past had finally been entirely washed clean, preparing the world for a brand new scientific age. The incredibly thick medical books from the brilliant Arab scholars firmly laid the permanent groundwork for future generations. We must always consciously look back at those deeply terrifying centuries with a truly profound sense of historical gratitude. Each entirely terrible mistake made by the dangerously ignorant barbers firmly pushed our modern science closer to the real truth. Ultimately surviving such profoundly devastating medical darkness truly proves the incredibly phenomenal endurance of all mankind. The incredibly sharp contrast between the rusted medieval tools and our completely clean modern instruments is profoundly striking. Without the incredibly agonizing pain of the distant past, the immensely rapid advancement of modern care would simply not exist. The very first brilliant universities turned those brutal danger shops into highly respected, magnificent halls of learning. They extremely carefully examined the entire human anatomy with profound, proper respect instead of blind religious fear. This remarkably brilliant new scientific method eventually cured the heavy plagues that once fully destroyed entire ancient empires. Those courageous early pioneers firmly and bravely stood against the oppressive dogma of the powerful medieval church. Their immensely courageous pursuit of undeniable truth established the permanent foundation of our modern global healthcare. If those deeply visionary doctors had never bravely challenged the old traditions, where exactly would we be standing today? today. Closing the darkened, tragic pages of this incredibly heavy chapter, we finally fully recognize the immense value of true science. The completely brutal, tragic loss of countless millions finally managed to awaken a profoundly blinded and silently sleeping world. We have truly successfully evolved from the tragic Dark Ages into a brilliantly magnificent era of enlightened modern healing. Let the remarkably tragic legacy of those brutal ancient barbers constantly remind us to absolutely never abandon true science. Our collective survival requires a highly constant pursuit of truth, entirely pushing the boundaries of human knowledge forward. These deeply terrifying ancient horrors clearly show that the path to modern science was completely paved with immense human suffering. Do you think those ancient barbers were cruel architects of suffering, or simply unfortunate victims of their own complete ignorance? Please do share your profound thoughts down below. Kindly hit the like button and safely subscribe to our channel for more history.